Hey everyone.
Hey there, guys. This is Rita.
This is Amanda, and you're listening to I Don't Know Her,
the podcast about women that you've probably never heard of, but you should have.
And now you will. So we're recording probably about 2 weeks before you guys are going to hear this episode. So some of this is going to be outdated and there's going to be new information by the time you hear it. But today is pretty, I don't know how to even describe it. It's scary, exhilarating, and so on and so forth. But there are basically nationwide protests happening simultaneously right now in like Seattle, Memphis, Baltimore, Louisville, Chicago, even in like small places like Fort Wayne, Indiana. Mm-hmm. They're having huge protests today to really come to terms with police brutality, and specifically over the murder of George Floyd.
Mm-hmm. There's even one that's going to be held tomorrow here in Spokane.
Are you planning on going?
I have to do my cooking for the homeless shelter, so I won't be able to make it.
I think I'm going to go. I was a little hesitant at first because when I was seeing the event pop up on social media, there were no Black affiliated entities that were in any way associated with the event. And I was like, I think it's a really wrong move at this moment in time for white organizations to like take up the mantle and be like, I want to stage a protest because I think police brutality is wrong. It's a noble idea, but like if your Black brothers and sisters and theys and thems don't want you to, then you shouldn't.
Yeah, and take a minute and listen.
So Abby told me, because she, I believe, is a donating member of the local Spokane NAACP. I give to Black Lens News, so we try to hit like both of our community organizations that work towards equality here in our city. She got an email this morning from the NAACP saying that they were one of the organizations affiliated with it tomorrow. So that made me feel better.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
But I'm watching places that are the size of Spokane have pretty intense confrontations with the police.
And
so I'm a little nervous.
When you say intense, describe what you've seen.
Well, I just was watching a whole Twitter thread from a white woman in Fort Wayne, Indiana, who was like, it was just like arm in arm people for 2 blocks that are just walking downtown in their city. And the police showed up with like the tear gas canisters. They're in full riot gear and they just started descending on them. They weren't doing anything. They were just walking and like chanting. And the police incited violence and were like attacking them. And then as I was like scrolling up, there was like the same thing was happening in New York. I scrolled up, the same thing was happening in Denver. Like it's really bad. They're really attacking people. And I'm not talking about this quote unquote provoked attack.
Yeah.
They are unprovoked, absolutely out of control, attacking citizens of the places they're supposedly in charge of serving and protecting.
Jesus.
And I feel like we're at a moment where we really have to have a true reckoning in this country with the way we have allowed our police forces in small cities even to become weaponized war machines. That's not acceptable.
Yeah, and there's no need for that either.
There is no situation in a small city that would ever warrant a fucking tank.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's armored vehicles. That's for war.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, what's funny is that this particular topic about over-weaponizing local police departments, I have seen, like, crazy-ass libertarians who I never get along with and never agree on any issue who are all in on this. And I do feel like most people would agree that having a fucking full ass army as a police force, a community police force, is fucking unacceptable.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
And here we're watching it happen. Like, the mayor of these towns told the police force not to do those things, and they fucking did it anyway because nobody's going to stop them right now.
No, and there's no way to. They're fully weaponized.
Yeah, who's going to stop them? The fucking National Guard? Who's going to call them in?
Yeah, exactly.
It's absolutely out of control, and I hope if there's one thing that comes out of all of this tragedy and violence, some of which is absolutely fucking necessary, I hope that we see an actual movement towards reform.
Yeah.
Because we need it.
It's time. I mean, it's been building. It's been building for hundreds of years. It's hitting a point now where people are just fucking tired of it.
Oof.
Yeah.
I don't even know.
Well, if you do go tomorrow, you know, I would recommend, you don't know what's going to happen, so just be prepared. You know, maybe have a bottle of water, be able to wash your face if you get tear gassed, you know, something like that.
Yeah, really, you need some milk.
Yeah.
If you put water on it, it'll burn more. So, you know, just everybody out there who's going to protests, I don't know, maybe 2 weeks from now when this airs, we'll still be protesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't be fucking opposed to that. I think that as we've talked about on this show, because we're a historical podcast, the only way things really change is that like constant, you know, movement where you just never let up. When we've talked about our anarchists who led labor strikes, those labor strikes went on sometimes weeks, months.
Yeah.
That's how you make lasting change, when the people come together and they sacrifice their own comfort and safety to make a point, and it keeps going.
Mm-hmm. It doesn't take that, just you're going to show up that one time and then, yay, you did it and you get a gold star and you get to go home. It has to be every day.
And that's something that I've seen happen a lot here, is that people will get all riled up. And I'm sure this is true elsewhere too, but I don't have experience to say what it's like when you're in another city. I know what it's like to live here in this mid-sized city where we're a blue city ensconced in a red region.
Mm-hmm.
That happens a lot. We have these well-meaning white people who are also well-meaning liberals who get really up in arms over this one specific incident. They come to one march or one rally, or they sign up for, you know, a racial justice organization that one time, and then after a month or so, when the news cycle changes, they're gone. They don't ever really come back to that until the event happens again.
Mm-hmm.
But it really does require a constant commitment.
And a constant calling out.
And calling in.
Mm-hmm. And showing up. And donating.
Yes.
And rallying.
And donating. You just have to keep doing it, and it's exhausting work.
It is.
But I think it's time to do it. Well,
So you told me you're super excited about this lady you're bringing today.
I am, and I think it's actually a great pivot for what we just talked about, which was extremely serious and difficult and an uncomfortable position that our country is in.
Mm-hmm.
I am telling a completely whimsical, light little tale about probably the funnest woman I have ever had the pleasure of researching.
No. Okay. Let us escape with you.
Okay. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Do you know who Mary Myers is?
I don't know her, but it sounds like a pretty normal name. Mary Myers.
I know. It's such a dull name. She changes it.
Oh, okay.
She was a female aeronaut and the first woman to become a professional balloonist.
Ooh. Balloonist?
Yeah, as in hot air balloons.
Okay.
I told you, this is absolutely whimsical.
There's a profession surrounding ballooning?
I guess.
Okay, lay it on me.
So, Mary Breed Hawley was born on August 1st, 1849 in Boston. She was actually from the prominent family lines of Breed and the Breeds of Boston and the Hollies of Connecticut. And now I knew about Breeds because there's a Breeds Hill in Boston.
Oh.
So I'd heard of it before, and that is her family. And in fact, her family, she's descended from a man who landed on the American soil / indigenous soil in 1630, just 10 years after the Jamestown colony.
Oh, wow.
Like, her family goes way back. Not much is really known about her early life. It can be assumed that because she descended from this very prominent family that she probably had a pretty privileged life. I couldn't find anything about education, but I did look up some of the laws at the time and the customs that were around girls in education. Most girls, even from prominent families, didn't go beyond like a basic education at this time.
Yeah.
It was thought that they didn't need it.
Yeah. So they probably kind of went to like a refinement stage and then was married off.
Yeah, pretty much. And in fact, she did get married at age 22 in 1871. She married a man named Carl Edgar Myers. So now that's how she became Mary Myers. They lived in New York State. So she moved from Boston to New York. Carl, he reminds me of some of the people we've talked about in the past. You could just tell he just couldn't find what he really wanted to do with his life. He was a banker and a photographer, an electrician and a mechanic.
He's just going to try little bites of everything. He's not going to commit to the actual meal.
No. And in fact, when they got married, like the thing he did primarily for the first few years is that he was a portrait photographer.
Okay.
But he was like super interested in aerial navigation. So flying in the air. And he actually did all of the research himself and taught himself the science behind gas-powered flight.
Oh, okay.
Really impressive.
Yeah.
And so he was really interested in doing aerial ballooning because that was basically like the only way you could fly at the time. That was the method of transportation in the air. And it wasn't really transportation. It was just like you could try to lift up and then come back down. So there were some pretty big issues that faced successful ballooning. One was how to create a balloon fabric that was light enough to sustain being constantly inflated and deflated and then folded up and kept somewhere. Mm-hmm. But that was still really strong and could withhold all of that gas being pumped into it.
Yeah.
Another issue was that obviously if you're going to go ballooning, you need like a big wide open space. Well, those are not usually where you find like gas tanks.
Yeah.
So he had to also contend with creating a portable hydrogen machine that could inflate the balloon that you could take with you to different places. And he also was really interested in making an actual like practical balloon, something that was like fast and efficient, could inflate quickly, could move fast. So he also was trying to create a different basket that would be less weight. So the traditional basket is the one you probably are thinking of where it's like wicker.
Yeah.
So he wanted to create one that was like lighter and more efficient than a wicker basket. So Mary, as Carl's partner and wife, was all in on this. And she would help him every step of the way on his trials and errors of creating these different ways of having balloons. And she was often the one who would like sew the balloon material, and then they would like do little mini experiments to see how the seams held up and so on and so forth. And that would be all of like they would do all of that obviously before they put a human in in it. And they were also studying meteorology, which at the time was like people thought it was bunk science.
Yeah.
But she and Carl were really adamant that they needed to understand specifically wind, which makes sense.
Yeah. What an odd like niche to get into though, like around that time, because you have so many people that are like probably thinking you're crazy.
Oh, I'm sure people that thought they were absolute loons. And I'm not saying that,
Sitting at dinner and what are you guys up to? What are you up to, Mary? Balloons.
So the meteorology thing was actually a big deal because what Carl's philosophy was that all this time as people are trying to determine how to get in the air, they're always figuring out ways to fight the wind. But he compared it to like boating, where you work with the tide, right? You don't want to go against the tide. It's a losing game.
Yeah.
He wanted to do the same with wind.
Oh, that is so simple, but so genius. Yes.
Exactly. So Carl and Mary actually patented, which I knew you would like.
I love patents.
A new durable balloon fabric. And what they would do is they would take really thin fabric, but they would dip it into a mixture of boiled linseed oil and turpentine that would allow it to remain thin and flexible, but also was impervious to the gas. Like it wasn't porous, so it didn't like take up moisture or take up the gas and make it deflate. I don't know how they figured that shit out, but they must have done a lot of experiments.
I was going to say they probably experimented a lot.
They did. In fact, as they were experimenting with these new designs, they needed someone to like test it out, right? As they got more advanced and knew that it could work, they needed somebody to actually be in the basket.
Yeah.
Piloting it. People who did this were called aeronauts. And so they hired a professional aeronaut to take the balloon up in the air. But there was this one time when the guy they hired was like, fuck no, I'm not going into this new fangled thing you've got here. And it was because Carl wanted to try out a new shape of balloon.
Okay.
He wanted to do a pear-shaped balloon.
Oh.
Where it tapered at the mouth instead of just a whole big sphere.
So like if you think about upside down?
No, like like a pear upside down. So the bulbous part and then it tapers down to the thin part.
Okay.
Now think about what you think of when you think of hot air balloons. That's what you think of.
The big giant grand top and then it tapers down to a center where you've got that gas fired power.
Apparently that's not the way they were originally designed. They were just giant balls.
Oh.
And so Carl Myers is the one who invents this new pear-shaped balloon.
Okay.
But his guy is like, fuck you, I'm not going in that.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't think it's going to work. Mm-hmm. He doesn't think this new shape is going to work. So Carl was like, fine, I'm going to do it myself. So Mary is on the ground watching as Carl is going up and down on this balloon, and it's fucking perfect. It's working like a dream. And what she's seeing, though, from the ground is suddenly, oh my God, I want to fly balloons.
She got inspired.
And Carl was like, yeah, exactly. She's like looking up in there. She was like, it's like funny. It's like she hadn't considered that she could be the one piloting it until she saw her husband do it. Prior to that, they'd only had these professionals do it. And she was like, wait, I know how the machine works. I'm a fucking professional. So Carl is like, yeah, babe, let's do it. He is 100% all in. And he liked the idea because then they wouldn't have to hire an aeronaut. Like she could just be the one and they could figure things. And she was smarter, right? Like she understood. She had been on the ground floor of creating these things. She would know best and better how to do this. And she was also studying all of the meteorology that they were doing, how weather and wind and altitude and barometric pressure worked. She knew all of that. And these other guys that were going in the baskets, they didn't. Mm-hmm. So he was really into having Mary be the one that goes up in the air. So she started doing everything she could to understand all of the different measures that you would take to be able to have a successful flight. And so she'd been practicing, you know, just on these like little like ups and downs where they always did their experiments. And so when she was ready, she was going to do a public flight. Oh. So on the 4th of July in 1880, Mary made her maiden voyage in a balloon, and there was a crowd of more than 15,000 people gathered to watch. prior to the day that she was supposed to do this flight, Mary decided that her name was too boring for a balloonist.
Okay. Oh no, what did she pick?
So she chose the name Carlotta.
Carlotta Myers?
Carlotta. Yeah, she's Carlotta the AERONAUT.
Okay.
And I don't know if you noticed, but her husband's name is Carl.
Oh. Interesting.
She just like the female version of his name. It's very weird.
Carl and Carlotta.
And also, Carl needed a new name too, so he was now known as the Professor.
Oh my gosh. Sell it, baby. Sell it.
I'm in love with these really eccentric, weird nerds. I just think they're great. So here's how a local reporter described what Carlotta looked like when she was flying. All of this is just brings me so much joy. The lady was dressed in a jaunty suit of blue flannel trimmed with a gold braid, her short skirts revealing neat-fitting gaiters. A knobby sailor's hat of plaited straw crowned the whole and gave her a boyish piquancy. The basket consists of a thin wooden platform suspended by hammock twine. As the aerial gently arose, the entire proportions of her youthful figure could be plainly seen, apparently standing on the very air itself as she waved her hat in salute. The aerial glided slowly northeastward to a height of about a mile, then retraced its path, passing quietly directly over the public square.
Oh, that's charming.
Isn't it? But yeah, there were a couple of places that referred to her little like blue flannel outfit as being like boyish, and she wore a little sailor's hat.
It's jaunty.
It's a jaunty little knobby hat. But this description is kind of like light and whimsical, right?
Yeah. They're just having fun.
That couldn't be farther from the truth of what was really happening inside of that basket, which, by the way, they described as a thin wooden platform suspended by hammock twine. So it's just like a piece of wood with ropes.
It's not even an encasing basket. It's just ropes.
It's just open air ropes.
Okay.
So here's how a 1966 article from American Heritage Magazine described what was really going on inside of that flimsy little basket. In order to make a balloon ascend and bring the craft safely down again, which she did out of sight of reporters, Carlotta had to estimate and control with split-second accuracy, wind drift, rate of fall, and the amount of sideways glide, and make them all come out even at just one point. She was not only daring and pretty, she was something of a genius.
Ooh.
Also, she went up in the basket, right?
Yeah.
Goes up in air.
Yeah.
She sends out homing pigeons with a little message on them that's like, "Hey, I just lifted off. I'm doing great. I expect to land at 1 p.m."
Oh, wow.
So basically, she's just tweeting her flight information.
That is amazing. That is like the first tweet.
It's the first tweet.
It is.
It's a literal bird carrying a message. It's a tweet. And she was the first person to ever do that.
Wow.
So she landed about 20 miles from where she took off in the field of a farmer's house. And he said when he arrived that she was, quote, most too young a girl to be trusted so far from home. And he put her in a horse and buggy with his son and had him take her back to the train station. So after this first flight, Mary was obsessed with flying balloons. And she was often hired to like ferry people up in a hot air balloon all over the region. She was attending fairs and expos. And the more she flew, the more accurate she became at predicting where she would land. Using barometric altitude and wind current readings, she could successfully pinpoint her landing with better accuracy than anyone else experimenting with aerial navigation. And in order to use the wind to her advantage, she used valve releases that would control the hydrogen gas, which, by the way, that's the kind of gas they're using is hydrogen. She would have sandbags to alter the weight inside of the basket. And there were rudders attached as well that she could navigate on each side that looked like fish fins that would change her direction.
Very cool.
And I don't even know how you would calculate as well as she did, like what degree at which you would turn a rudder to make that kind of turn that would set you down in that one spot.
Yeah,
it blows my
take
mind.
Some skill. Yeah.
And this is like, it's aerial navigation. It's not like you could do it like you would on a map, right? Everything is literally up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
So as the two of them became more successful at flying balloons, they realized that they needed a space large enough so that they could manufacture and test their balloons. So in 1889, they purchased a 5-acre farm with a 3-story, 30-room Victorian mansion in Frankfort, New York.
Whoa.
So the field would often be littered with half-deflated balloons, giving the impression that they were, quote, growing balloons because it looked like mushroom heads. And their property then, because of this, became known as the Balloon Farm.
That's cute.
And like tourists and visitors would come from all over to look at the balloon farm. And so here's how a reporter described the balloon farm spectacle when he came to see it for a flight show. In summertime, the visitor, and visitors come in swarms, sees fields marked off in rows with stakes and crosspoles on which balloon cloth by hundreds of yards seems to be growing. Really, it's drying. And other fields that look like an Eskimo village with houses of crinkly yellowish stuff. Really, half-inflated balloons. And groups of men boiling varnish in kettles which are always getting on fire and may explode. And other men working nimbly at the knitting of nets. And others experimenting with parachutes. And the professor paddling away at the height of 3,000 feet for his afternoon sky cycle sail. And Mademoiselle Carlotta, the celebrated aeronaut and also the professor's wife, making an ascension now and then from the front lawn in a chosen one of her 20-odd balloons. And in winter, should you explore the upper rooms of the house, you would find all the balloons tucked away snugly in cocoons, as it were, fast asleep, ranged on the attic floor, each under its net, each ticketed with a record of its work, marked for good or bad conduct after it has been tested by master or mistress.
Seems like a fun life.
Giant mansion full of balloons.
It's like Willy Wonka, but with balloons.
I know. It is. I want like a movie about these guys just because they sound so fun. But that last part about how each of the balloons had like a ticket on them, that was absolutely 100% true. Every single one of their balloons, they had kept meticulous records of, every flight that had ever gone on, what went right, what went wrong, and then they would tack it to that balloon, and then they would try to improve upon it in the next season. Really smart.
Very, yeah.
As you can probably tell from that quote, the balloon farm was a pretty bustling place. And it was part tourist attraction, part aerial field, but also part research facility. So Carl and Mary weren't experimenting just for the sake of experimenting. Carl's successful and innovative designs put him on the market as the man to go to if you wanted a balloon. So the couple not only created balloons for personal use, like people who just wanted to buy their own hot air balloon, but they were also hired by the U.S. Weather Bureau to create weather balloons. And that was a new thing.
Yeah.
To study weather patterns. They also created experimental balloons for the U.S. government when the U.S. government, I didn't even know this was a thing, was working on the idea of creating man-made rain.
What?
And I guess he was like successful at it. He made balloons that could create rain.
Huh. I wonder if they like change like the heat and cool patterns within the clouds or something.
I guess.
That's bonkers. I've never heard of that.
Me neither, but he created these balloons specifically for the US government to do these experiments.
Why does the government want to make rain? Now I'm scared.
I know. I was like, what do they think is happening? So they also made balloon equipment for the military that ended up actually being used for the Spanish-American War. And they opened up a flight school at their farm where they taught people lessons on how to pilot passenger balloons.
Ooh.
Like, these are just so industrious.
Yeah.
And earlier I mentioned that they had that patent. They actually had several patents. Carl has 5 patents that he has attributed to him. You can Google them. Only one of them actually specifically includes Carlotta on them, but she helped design every one of them. So her name was just not on the other 4. The patent that she's named on was that guiding apparatus that made her such a great navigator.
Nice.
Carl also patented the portable gas generator that he would use to pump up balloons, and the varnishing machine that Carlotta helped create, as well as some more interesting inventions like his airship, which is it was like a torpedo airship. And probably the weirdest and coolest invention he made was this thing called a sky cycle.
What is that?
It's like a bike that is in the air.
Oh, okay.
It has like dozens of various shaped and sized like wings, I guess, but they're not wings. It's more like balloons that have been like strung up in different shapes and whatever. And he would be able to lift off from ground and like fly around on his afternoon sky cycle sail by himself. And he had this idea that like this should be a new mode of transportation that could replace things like trains and cars, because you could get somewhere quickly. The skies weren't as crowded as those tracks and roads, and it was like easy and fast.
Yeah.
And you could do it yourself.
Crazy.
I was like, why didn't we ever run with this invention?
Mm-hmm.
This is neat. Like after this, I have to show you a picture of his sky cycle because it's
okay.
Totally wild. So meanwhile, Mary is traveling all over the country, doing balloon demonstrations and taking people on balloon rides. And they were so efficient at balloon events that they were able to show up at noon, unpack their equipment, set up, produce the hydrogen gas, do a flight demonstration, pack everything up, and clear out with enough time that the venues could set up for an evening event, like a concert.
Cool.
Yeah, it means they were really fast. Because, like, if you think about it, a concert probably started at, 7?
Yeah.
And they got there at noon and did all of that probably done by 5.
Wow. That's really cool.
So it's estimated that Mary carried more than 100,000 passengers in her balloons and performed more flights than all other female aeronauts combined.
Wow.
And she flew more times than any man in the United States.
That's really
Sometimes she even would perform little tricks and stunts like jumps out of her balloon.
cool. No, thanks.
So one of her most famous flights was when she decided to fly from Brooklyn to Manhattan and then back to Jersey. And so she did this during rush hour so that there was the maximum amount of people who could see her. And she flew really low over the city, just above the Brooklyn Bridge, where people were in their cars and they stopped and got out of them to cheer her on. And she was like literally floating just like feet above them.
Cool.
And she even did that like over the ferries that were on the river.
Oh.
And the people on the ferries were just going wild for her.
Mm-hmm.
And then she landed safe and sound in Secaucus, New Jersey, and the papers went wild with her story. But not all of her flights were great. Not all of them went smoothly, as you might imagine.
Mm-hmm.
One of her earliest flights almost ended up in an unimaginable disaster. In September of 1880, she was taking off in front of a large crowd and she saw a storm coming. She wanted to get up quickly before the storm burst onto the crowd and they all left before they really got to see her. So as she began to go up in the air, the storm clouds sucked her balloon up, and soon she was going really, really fast, very, very high. Like it's
Yikes.
like this storm cloud is just...
Yeah.
She just keeps going higher and higher and higher. And she knew there was a chance that if she kept going higher, her balloon might burst from the atmospheric change. And that would send her obviously crashing to the ground and she would be dead. Carlotta was trying to slow the balloon down by letting out some of the gas and like changing the weight around in the basket, but it didn't do much because that balloon just kept on going up. And she was being whipped around by the wind, and rain was starting to fill the basket, which was also changing the weight. And she couldn't make adjustments because she didn't know how much it weighed. And she kept watching the barometer readings and making judgments about when to release some more gas and steering the fins as best she could. And it was just like out of fucking control. And then suddenly, poof, she was up above the clouds, above the storm.
And she was okay?
And she was currently at that moment higher than any other aeronaut had ever gone before. She was above the clouds. She described it as being, quote, above the snow-white mountains of Cloudland. But she had to get down.
Yeah, I was like, what you gonna do, B?
Yeah, it's like super peaceful up above Cloudland. But now you got to go back down. So she knew that she needed to get down because also like the oxygen is thinner up there and you can die. So she's starting to do this and she wants to go down slow and long. So like if you think about like a really long curve, that's her plan, but it means that she spends more time in the middle of this storm. And it's pretty dicey. And she's making it down. And she still can't see the ground, though. So she doesn't know exactly where she's going to land. And then suddenly, through the mist, there was the ground. And it was way closer than she thought it was supposed to be.
Oh, no.
And this is what she said. The balloon bounded rapidly across the treetops with a hop, skip, and a jump. The basket collected leaves, twigs, and acorns at every plunge, till an immense basswood tree, looming high above the forest, threatened to wreck craft, crew, and cargo. I cast anchor immediately. And she's stuck in a tree. And not just any tree. She is 80 feet in the air.
Oh, no.
And there's legit no way for her to get down. There's no way. She can't. The balloon is stuck inside the branches. Ground is 80 feet down. She can't like climb down. So she just has to sit there and hope that somebody comes by.
Oh,
and thankfully they do. 2 hunters see her stuck up in the tree and they are like, what the hell is happening?
What are you doing in there?
And so when she sees them, she was like, oh, thank God. And so she starts telling him, I need you to take off this branch. And then I need to to take off this branch. And then I need you to do this. And they were like, nah, lady, that's not that's not how that's going to work. And they didn't trust her. They didn't think that she had any idea what she was talking about. And she had to make them listen to her and had to convince them, buddy, I may be stuck 80 feet up in a tree, but I know my fucking balloon. I know how air works. Listen to me. And she finally got them to listen, and they did do what she said. So when she finally got the balloon to land on the ground, she had been up in the air for over 2 hours up in that basket, and she was like overjoyed, as you might imagine.
Mm-hmm.
So here's what it was like, what she said it was like when she met the men on the ground finally. We were all much fatigued and glad to shake hands together as we were quite like old friends. The men said they never knew a woman could engineer a job so well before, but I guess that may be because they never caught one up in a tree. So a few months after this flight, Carlotta gave birth to their daughter, who they named Elizabeth Ariel.
I get it.
Ariel. And it is spelled like Ariel, like aerial navigation.
Nice.
Not like Ariel the mermaid. That means, though, that she had done that dangerous flight that I just explained while pregnant.
Ah! Sorry, that was loud, but I was shocked.
So Carlotta waited until Bessie, that's what they called their daughter, was 3 before they took her on a flight. But there were a couple other times when Carlotta had a couple of bad flights. One of them, her balloon literally came apart while she was in midair, and she managed to grab enough of the balloon to create a parachute and parachuted herself to ground. So, and another close call actually involved her daughter.
Oh.
So Mary miscalculated the weight that her 7-year-old daughter, the difference that she would make in the basket. And they ended up, when they were flying, ended up landing in a lake called the Devil's Punch Bowl.
No,
sounds like a really awful day. And like they were like fully in the water, and the balloon is in the water, so they can't get back up, right? And like if the basket takes on water, they're just gonna drown. So Bessie, again, 7 years old, climbs out of the basket and onto a log and paddles to shore. Then little Bessie pulled her mother in the basket towards her. Oh,
jeez.
Well, they made it safely to shore and they were fine. But that little girl was obviously traumatized.
Yeah.
And she was like, I'm never doing that again. And she never did. She never went back up into a balloon.
Oh, that's a shame.
So there was, Carl was always into trying out new things. And at the time, there was a new gas craze, natural gas. And he wanted to try using natural gas instead of hydrogen to power their balloons. And Carlotta was like, okay, that sounds great. I will be the pilot. So according to her barometer, the idea was that natural gas actually wouldn't be as effective as hydrogen because it doesn't have the same force.
Okay.
But that's not what happened. It shot her up in the air real fast. And in fact, her barometer read 21,000 feet.
Whoa.
In a fucking balloon. And that was a world record. No one had ever gone up that high before. When she was asked about how it felt to be up that high, she said, quote, my eyes bulged out, the blood ran from my nose, my ears rang, and my cheeks flapped in and out like sails. I opened my dress at the throat as to let the lungs have just as free play as possible, for my breath came in short, convulsive gasps.
She's like suffocating.
Right, it's oxygen deprivation to be
Yeah.
up that high without an oxygen tank or pressurized cabin like we have in regular planes. She had nothing. She was just freestanding, just in the fucking air at 21,000 feet. So she ended up, thankfully, not having any lasting damage from that oxygen deprivation.
Good.
But that was actually 2 records that she set at once. One was being up that high without an oxygen tank, and 2 was just solo flying up 20,000 feet. Incidentally, there was a reporter with her on that to try to like record what was happening, because this is like this world record being set. And he was literally scared shitless. He turned white. He was like shaking. He had like a fever.
Ugh.
So like in mid-flight, he was just kind of delirious. She literally tied him down and anchored him to the balloon because he was
because he was freaking
out of control. Yeah, he was just losing it. So when they landed, he was like, please never tell anybody about this. Never tell them my name. And so afterwards, she said this, I hardly care to take any more men up. I might take a woman with me, but a man, that's different. So Carlotta, the lady aeronaut, retired from ballooning in 1891, though she still helped pilot her husband's new inventions on the farm. Eventually, though, both of them decided to retire. I think they were about in their 60s when they retired. One thing I said, no, it wasn't at all. It said that like he, all the way up until his 60s, would every single day take his sky cycle up and sail around a little bit, which sounds really fun.
Sky cycle.
Sky cycle, yeah. And they sold the balloon farm and moved to Atlanta to live with their daughter, Elizabeth. Carl Myers died in 1925 at the age of 83, and Carlotta Myers died on her birthday, August 1st, 1932. She was also 83.
Whoa.
So, unfortunately, once the Wright brothers and airplanes and people like Amelia Earhart and whatever took over the public's fascination with flight, everything that the Myers had done prior to that became overshadowed and completely forgotten.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's important to remember that these two were both incredible innovators and that Mary Carlotta Myers made her mark on history of women in flight. She was the first woman in the U.S. to pilot her own aircraft. She set an altitude world record. She had the highest number of one-woman piloted balloon trips ever, and more than all other women combined. And she made more balloon flights than any man in America. Those are some fucking impressive stats.
They are.
Mary Carlotta Myers was a force to be reckoned with. She was an eccentric little nerd who lived her dreams and was the first person to fly above the clouds, a place she called Cloudland. And I just thought, may we all have the opportunity to make our wildest dreams possible.
That was very nice.
Didn't you enjoy her?
That's a lot about balloons.
So I used a little bit of Wikipedia, but I'll tell you that my favorite thing to use was a website called Racing Nellie Bly. There was also on storyoftheweek.org a story about her called Carlotta the Lady Aeronaut, and it included a big long section of her talking about that flight where she landed in the tree. Mistress of the Winds, Cheated Death, and Ruled the Skies by Sharon Wright for the New York Post. Aerial Adventures of Carlotta, the Lady Aeronaut, or Skylarking in Cloudland, which is what she called her little memoir, which she had written a little memoir of her time as a balloonist, and Carl self-published it for her.
Oh, that's cool.
So that article was by Preston R. Bassett for the August 1966 issue of American Heritage Magazine. And last but not least, the Herkimer County History Minute, Carlotta the Lady Internet, on the Herkimer County Historical Society YouTube channel.
That sounds like a very interesting YouTube channel.
Anyway, I thought that was a nice little wholesome story.
It was very cool, and I had no idea who she was or what she did.
I hope you enjoyed it.
I did. I like that eccentric little nerd.
I love, and like somebody described them as being like these stick-like figures, both of them. They were like just really thin, gangly looking bird people.
Oh.
And I was like, that is fucking perfect. Because somebody said like, oh, a lot of people compared them to looking like birds, which made it like fitting that they liked to do flights. Oh, I do want to mention one thing that I didn't put in my notes because it's kind of extraneous. But he ended up being one of the central organizers of the St. Louis World's Fair. And he was in charge of all the flights. Oh. And he had Bessie fly his sky cycle inside of like a big auditorium gymnasium. And she was so good at navigating it that she could go all the way around the room and never touch the wall or the walls or the ceiling.
That is crazy.
Yes.
So Bessie didn't ever take up her mom's reign, did she?
No, she did. She was interested in flight, but she never wanted to be in a balloon.
Yeah. I could imagine that would be like I wouldn't want to go back in there.
No, imagine how traumatizing that would be to be 7. I mean, she was 3 when her mom took her up on the first balloon ride, and that was probably scary as it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lay it on me. Who do you have?
Okay. Do you know who Mariya Oktyabrskaya is?
That sounds Russian. I almost certainly have no idea who that is.
And I had to look up and research my Russian pronunciation, so hopefully I'm doing okay. She
At least
is
Russian is closer to English than, say, some other languages. So
yes, she is a Soviet tank driver during World War II.
Well, then. We're just coming up with wild women today.
I think so. Women who are kind of just going to do their own thing. So Mariya's story begins at the end days of the Russian Empire. She was born with a maiden name, Vasilyevna, and was born in 1905. And that's the last time I'm going to say that name because I'm not going to do it again. She was born into a poor peasant serf family on the Crimean Peninsula. So I believe you probably know what a serf is, right? It's just basically...
Yes. Like a peasant. It's like almost it's a slightly above a slave.
Yes. She was one of 10 children. No, thank you. and her household was under Russian control, and they all worked on they would call it their family farm, but it really wasn't their farm. I mean, if they're in serfdom, they're working for somebody else.
Yeah, that's what being a serf is. You work for someone else.
As she got older and after the Russian Revolution, she embraced communism pretty hard because now she could find a job. She had access to education. She didn't have to work for somebody else. I mean, why wouldn't you embrace a new concept like that?
Mm-hmm.
So she got not just one job, she got two. She worked in a cannery, and then she also worked as a phone operator.
Oh, yeah, it's in the 1900s. I was like, there were phones? I was like still in my head like Carlotta's time, and definitely not phones.
Not phones. In 1925, when she's 20 years old, she meets a Soviet army officer named Ilya, and that name again, Oktyabrskaya. She was quite proud of dating a military man so much that they just like had this really fast and furious romance and got married quite quickly. She was really proud of her husband and what he did so much that it inspired her to take on a role as she wanted to be like a super military wife. So she joins the Military Wives Council, and there she actually continues her education and gets professionally trained to be an army nurse.
It's interesting.
So Mariya, wanting to soak up all things military, she starts working with her husband, and he starts training her how to use an array of weapons. He teaches her how to shoot, and he also teaches her how to drive. Yeah.
Woo, okay. I'm like imagining this like beefy Russian woman who can like shoot lots of big guns.
And her and her husband having this crazy romance while firing guns.
Yeah. Sounds a very Bonnie and Clyde, but Russian.
But in Russian. So these two together had a real fiery passion for all things army. He decided to go ahead and teach her hand-to-hand combat skills as well. And they both wanted to prove that they were willing to fight for Russia together. So when World War II came into play in 1939, the Soviet Union had signed, I'm going to go into a little bit of this because I wasn't too clear about the history of this relationship between Russia and what happened during World War II. So the Soviet Union had signed a non-aggression pact with Nazi Germany in an effort to stay out of the fighting, and then they were going to equally divide up conquering Poland. So as Germany invaded one side of Poland, the Soviet Union followed with an invasion from the other side. But then, of course, Nazis being Nazis and they're fucking assholes, of course they went against the agreement. And they launched they launched a surprise invasion against the Soviet Union in 1941, breaking the pact. So in return, Stalin meets with Winston Churchill and FDR to join together in a two-front war against Germany. So Mariya and Ilya were in the midst of all of this fighting. When the Eastern Front of World War II opened, Mariya was evacuated to Tomsk in Siberia, and then Ilya was sent to fight the Nazi forces in Kiev. And that would be the last time that those two would see each other.
Oh, no.
So while living in Tomsk for 2 years, Mariya was waiting for word from her husband. And she finally learned that her husband had been killed at the beginning of the fighting in August of 1941. So he had been dead for 2 years and she didn't know.
Oh, that's painful.
She was devastated beyond belief. She described her feelings as being consumed with anger and trying to find a way to avenge her husband's death. She decided to up and rid herself of all of her possessions. She sold every ounce of property that her and her husband had acquired together. She took all of that money and she donated the money to the Red Army. And at this point in time, you could donate to, say you want to donate to the medical, buying medical supplies, or you could buy arms, or you could donate money to build vehicles. And so she insisted that this money be spent on a T-34 medium-sized tank. And
it's very specific.
Very specific. And the tank, she wanted it to be named. So it has 3 translations from Russian. So one of the names is the Fighting Girl. One of them is the Fighting Girlfriend. And then there was another one of like the Fighting Woman, something like that. So it can be an array of things, but it mostly was called the Fighting Girlfriend. And she had one very specific request. She wanted to be the one to drive it. Yeah. She's
I
like,
don't know how you make that request. Hey, I want to buy you a tank, but I'm going to drive it. You understand?
She wrote a letter to Stalin and the State Defense Committee making this request. So I'm going to read you a little bit of what her letter said. My husband was killed in action defending the motherland. I want revenge on the fascist dogs for his death and for the death of Soviet people tortured by these fascist barbarians. For this purpose, I've deposited all of my personal savings, 50,000 rubles, which is, I looked it up, it's $800 US, to the National Bank in order to build a tank. I kindly asked to name the tank the Fighting Girlfriend and to send me on the front line as a driver of said tank.
That is, 1, powerfully written, and 2, very aggressive. That like, I want to fight the fascist dogs myself.
I know she threw fascist in there twice. I was like, woo.
Well, that's what they were.
Yeah.
More power to you. I mean, that's pretty great, Mariya.
So Stalin felt he had no choice but to accept. The State Defense Committee said, also, this might be good for us. A positive effect, a morale booster for the troops. Like, this story might inspire people to fight harder or to fight towards something, to help this woman get her revenge for her husband's death.
Yeah, it's like nationalism.
So
Patriotism.
Mariya's request was accepted on the grounds that she had to do 5 months of training in order to learn how to fully operate and how to fully, if it got broken, how to fix and maintain her T-34. She was 38 at this time.
Well, it's wild to me that she's pretty established in her life. Like 38 isn't a spring chicken.
No.
But it's still fairly young. I mean, to be taking on something like that. But what I'm thinking about is like selling off everything that you've ever earned and own so that you can do this one thing. That seems a little bit unhinged.
I think she was, just because of her husband's death, she was blinded by her anger.
Yeah, she had like grief rage.
Yep. Well, 5 months to me doesn't seem very long to learn how to operate a fucking tank. But
if it's the only thing you're doing.
True. But I guess tank crews usually received shorter training because they had to get them out on the front lines.
Oh.
And sometimes they'd show up and their tanks like weren't even painted yet.
Well, I remember reading about how in Russia or in the Soviet Union, they were getting, they were basically desperate for fighters, and they were just getting like townspeople to take up their rifles they had in their houses and go to the front line. But honestly, the Nazis made their worst decision by trying to invade Russia. If they hadn't done that, it might have turned out differently.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And like you said, the Soviet Union was desperate for people to fight. They were pulling from all different angles of people to get onto the front lines. She wasn't as well received as the Defense Committee thought she would be. Like, duh. She shows up and these other tank drivers who have been doing this for months and years are super skeptical of her. They think that she's nothing more than a publicity stunt.
Oh, I could see that. Especially if they like publicized this situation, then it would seem like she was just a figurehead or a show, not a real person that really had this goal in mind.
After her training was complete, she transferred over to the 26th Guards Tank Brigade in 1943. And she was headed off to what was called the Second Battle of Smolensk. So hopefully I said that right. So as the battle began, the Red Army pushed the Germans back with Mariya at the helm of the Fighting Girlfriend. That battle, she was the first tank to penetrate the Nazi line of defense. She's driving straight on right into the middle and the strongest and most dangerous point of the line. Like, she's going full guns ahead.
Yikes.
She and her crew single-handedly took out a number of German machine gun nests, anti-tank guns, as well as 30 frontline Nazi soldiers.
Yay, Mariya. Take out those Nazis.
So since she was in front, she also was the first one to receive most of the artillery fire. So while she's pushing forward, they would do this too a lot. They fired on her tank treads so that the tank couldn't move. So Mariya ends up jumping out of her tank in the middle of a firefight to fix the treads.
Oh,
she
Jesus.
requests covering fire. So while her crew is providing covering fire for her, she works and repairs the treads, and she got her crew out safely out of that battle.
How? I don't even understand how she didn't get shot.
Exactly. And so for this act, she was actually, they're like, hey, a lot of people shut their mouths and were like, she is what she says she is. And so she was promoted to sergeant.
Oh, nice.
So in 1943, after fending off a night raid by the Nazis, Mariya's tank was again hit by artillery fire. Once again, she does this crazy thing. She jumps out of her tank, she fixes it, and she wards off German forces in her one single tank with her crew, which is a crew of 3 people. They hold out for 2 days.
I was thinking like she had like 8-10 people with her. No, 3 people. Okay.
Yep. So they hold out for 2 days. She maneuvers her way out, saving her crew again and being able to rejoin the main unit. And that's what helped push forward and recapture a town called Novoye Cielo. And after that battle, she's writing this, there's some letters that were written to her sister while she was on the front lines. And like I said, like how I feel like she was consumed with revenge. This is what she wrote to her sister. I have had my baptism by fire. I beat the bastards. Sometimes I am so angry, I can't even breathe.
I can imagine that anger.
The way that she's so angry, I feel like her and her husband had something very special that she feels just robbed of.
Yeah. I can imagine that. I mean, when you have your future taken away from you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they had no children, so I wonder if she just felt like she had nothing left to give him other than this. Or for her country, too, because she was so diehard for Russia.
Yeah. Man. It's intense.
So Mariya fought her last battle on January 17th, 1944. Soviet forces worked to recapture the village of Shevedi in the Vitsbek region. The Fighting Girlfriend pushed through the front lines, taking out Nazi trenches and artillery defenses. She was hit and immobilized again by anti-tank shells, so she was determined to keep fighting. So as she went outside of her tank to repair her treads, a shell exploded right next to her, hitting her with shrapnel in her head, severely wounding her and sending her into a coma. She was transported to a Soviet military hospital near Kiev, where she never awoke, and her tank was actually destroyed in battle. She passed away about 2 months on March 15th in 1944.
She was in a coma for 2 months?
For 2 months.
Oh, that's heartbreaking.
So her bravery was not unrecognized. Her crew and the group that she worked for put in her name, and she was awarded, after her death, with the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal. It is the highest military award available to those who served in the Red Army. And she was the first female tank driver to ever receive that award. And actually, there are only 96 women to this day that have received that medal. And she's one of them. In Russia, and she's one of them.
Yeah, and she's the first.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
And so I was like a little curious of how many women fought in World War II for Russia. There was 800,000 women that fought in that war.
That's impressive as shit, right?
And nearly 200,000 of them have been decorated.
Wow. Well, I mean,
know.
Good for Russia?
she did the little question mark.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wild.
So her memory is remembered because she took everything head on, and she really put herself and her life on the line for her country. She also has a statue that is in her honor in Tomsk, where she was at when she found out that her husband had died.
I'm glad that she is remembered. You know, so many of the people we talk about, their memories get forgotten, overshadowed. Mm-hmm. I mean, even Carlotta tonight that I mentioned, her story was completely forgotten for years.
I guess while the war continued on, a lot of the men all painted on their tanks the name of her tank, which was the Fighting Girlfriend, in her honor, so that they felt like she could still be with them as they went into battle. So she really had cool. a mark on these men, yeah. Men and women, I should say.
It's amazing how many women fought for the Red Army.
I was really surprised. A lot were, it said the prominent numbers were, of course, nurses. Mm-hmm. But there was a lot of like women who flew planes, other women that drove tanks, other women that were on the front lines running with guns, you know, into the battle.
You know, I think I talked about it on the podcast a little bit when I talked about Nancy Wake, the spy.
Yes.
But Britain had a considerable amount of female pilots that were never, ever, ever recognized, even after the war, decades, because they weren't technically allowed to do that. So they would like classify them as something other than what they were. And so they never got fully recognized for flying in World War II.
That is insane.
And so
were they afraid of getting in trouble for it, or?
No, it's just that women weren't allowed to do that, even though they were having them do it anyway. So they couldn't decorate them for something they, you know, like, let's say if they were allowed, they would have been a lieutenant, but that wasn't allowed. So they were just never recognized.
Jeez.
It was really shitty.
That is really shitty. Well, that's my lady. I thought she was, even though she was consumed with what she was doing, she made a difference. And not all of our stories are going to be, you know, oh, I want to do the greater good. She wanted to kill some fucking Nazis.
She just want to kill some damn Nazis.
I got my information from, there is a website called worldoftanks.eu.
Your search history probably looks real wild after this one.
Yes, World of Tanks. It's awesome. Military.wikia.org. Vintage news. All that is interesting. And then an article by Andre Tapalaga from medium.com. It's called The Fighting Girlfriend T-34.
Very cool. Thank you for sharing Mariya's story. Say her last name once again for us.
I don't have the paper in front of me. I wrote it out phonetically.
I just wanted to make you squirm under that Russian name. had to say all those French ones yesterday.
You did, and we do our best. We do our best with our accents.
Well, thank you for sharing her story. I enjoyed it.
Oh, yours too. I enjoyed that a lot.
So this is our second to our second to last episode of this season. This is our second season. If you haven't listened to our first season, go back. Maybe skip the first one. It's a little rocky.
It is. It's painful for me to go back and listen to.
But our last episode will be our next one. But that doesn't mean we won't be doing stuff over the summer. There will be some bonus material, and also we'll be checking in to talk to you about our progress on revamping our website and things like that. So keep subscribing and keep looking at your podcast to see what we've got going on.
I'd like to say thank you to our editor who's been with us for these wonderful 2 seasons, Lucas McIntyre.
And thank you also to Jennifer Finch for our lovely theme music, which you can listen to in its entirety on L7's Hungry for Stink album. We always recommend you check that out.
Thanks for listening to our Balloons and Tanks episode.
The Balloons and Tanks episode has come to a close.
Till next time.
Goodbye, everybody.